Good evening. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. I'll be tonight's host. With me tonight we have Ernie Nepomuceno, who is a candidate for first selectman in Brookfield. Ernie is running under the Best for Brookfield party, which is a separate party in Brookfield. Ernie, tell us about your background. Tell the audience about your background, who you are, where you come from, and then we'll move on to issues.
Well, Dave, we moved to this area in 1980, and I got active in politics. I moved in with Union Carbide Corporation when they moved into the area. Actually, both my wife and I worked for Union Carbide. I got involved in politics about 12 years ago. I was appointed on the Inland Wetlands Commission, and right at the first year, I became chairman right away. After 4 years, I ran on the Board of Finance, and having won that, and the very first year, I was elected by the board members to be the chairman. And I have been chairman since then for the past 8 years. I am active in town. I belong to the local Lions Club. I do a lot of volunteering in town. It's funny how I got involved in politics. And I remember in 2001, the tax rate went up by almost 10%. And I was telling my wife, I said, gee, look at this. How can anyone afford almost 10% tax increase? And she said, well, if you don't like it, then get involved. That's how it started. And so for the past 8 years, we kept taxes low. In fact, it averaged about 3.1%, just right about at inflation rate. My background is in industrial engineering, also in finance and information systems. I started as industrial engineer, then went back to school. I got a degree in finance, went back to school. I got a master's degree in information systems. And so I used to manage an information systems group when I was working in my private life. I retired from private life in 2004. And since then, I spent full time. We own a small business in town, which is Samuel Dallas Company. It is an industrial distributor for power transmission and hydraulics. And so that's where I spend my time. Now, I got into this race, and I waited. I waited at the end because I want to see what would be the landscape. And I was a registered Republican voter before for many years, and I didn't go through the Republican Town Committee into that process because I did not want to divide the Republican Town Committee. And so I decided if I had to do this, I will run as an unaffiliated candidate.
Excellent.
And that is the decision that I did. And so that's how I started this.
Well, your wife sounds like a very bright woman and very astute in the observation that if you don't like what's going on in town, you have two choices. You can either stand on the sidelines and complain about it, or you can get actively involved. And so many people make the decision to carp and complain and feel like they're powerless when the very few actually end up getting involved and deciding to get involved and to be part of the process, to put up or shut up, if you will, to get involved to make the town a better place, whichever town they live in. In your case, Brookfield, and it sounds like the fact that you've been elevated to chair of these committees early on is a testimony to the fact that the people that you were working with recognized your ability to lead. And I think that's something that's probably should be noted on your behalf. Now, what do you think are some of the principal issues in Brookfield today? What things pique your interest the most and that you think you can have the most impact on as first selectman?
Well, in Brookfield we have a number of pressing issues, of course, one of which boils down to revenue. Last year, for the first time, we saw the ground lease in Brookfield decline, and therefore the revenue also declined. We also had experienced a 2.5 million tree settlement, and that preclude us from, for instance, fixing our roads in due time. We also have a $42 million error in the ground lease, and that impacted about 1.2 million from our fund balance. And so we also have a number of different projects, the largest one being the high school, which is a $31.7 million project, of which at the time it was being proposed, I publicly campaigned to get it approved because I do support the education in town. We have other infrastructure issues in town. We have a number of projects now where we're trying to provide potable drinking water to the residents of these condominiums, particularly those in Silver Mine Road.
Yes.
Because their water is contaminated. So we've done that. It is currently in progress. The sewer issue on the other 3 condominiums along Route 25, that is a $5.5 million project, and that's been done due to consent from the state DEP. Okay, that's almost done. We had installed a water line also to the northern portion of Federal Road, and that's just about done or still in progress. We also put a water line along Federal Road down up to Route 133. The next issue that we're going to have is to provide a water line to the southern portion of Federal Road. And I mean from 133 all the way down to the Danbury border. In order for us to promote commercial development in that section of Federal Road, we need to provide water. Not just potable water, but also fire suppression capability. In addition to that, I know that the 2 condominium complexes on that road, I believe it's Sandy Lane and Rollingwood, they're also having issue with water. I believe, like at Sandy Lane, their water is also contaminated. The other thing was a number of years ago that there was a fire on Rollingwood.
I remember that.
And one building burned down to the ground because there was not enough fire suppression. And so my priority is to get that water right down to that portion of Federal Road.
Now, when you say contaminated, the water in these different neighborhoods is not dirty per se. And it's not radon. I believe it's uranium.
It is uranium. It is contaminated with uranium, just like those condominiums on Silver Mine Road.
Yeah, and if it were radon, they could address it using filtration. But apparently, uranium cannot be addressed that way. It's not really usable as water at all.
That's correct. Another issue facing us is, again, with respect to commercial development, we're concerned about I'm personally concerned about the 4 corners in town, what we call the Village District. I think that when Route 7 bypass is completed and open, probably at the latter end of this year, if not early next year, we need to look at the demographics in that area. We need to look at how we can, including traffic pattern, if you will.
Yep.
And we need to work with those businesses in that area to see how we can help them. We need to make sure that they can survive in a sustainable, and that they just won't leave the town. So that's a major issue in town, in that portion of the town. So
now, I've heard that the vision for the 4 corners is a pedestrian mall setup where people will have easy access. They can park and they can stroll around the entire area and have the ability to go to small shops, to go to small restaurants, small locally owned restaurants and locally owned shops that will employ a lot of people. Is that how you see that unfolding?
In a way, yes. We need to make that area a destination place. In fact, The plan of development is being updated pretty soon. And the Planning Commission is working on that to get the plan of development updated, primarily focusing on the Village District. Yes, that's how I would see that. It's like a small, real New England type of area. But you can make that a pedestrian friendly all the way down to Route 133, for instance, because that area is an industrial, zone industrial, so there's no shops being put up there. And so, but you can focus only on the four corners. That you can make a really a pedestrian-friendly district.
Yeah, with the Silver Mine Art League there, the Art Junction there, and all the other things that are already there in place that are kind of an anchor to that, the artistic side of the area.
Right. The other issue that I see in town is that, again, everything pretty much boils down to revenue. One of the things that we have not talked about is our pension liability. I think the actuarial report is just about to be released pretty soon, but as far as I know, our pension trust, employees' pension plan is unfunded by a significant amount.
Which means that ultimately you'll be looking for money from somewhere to pay people's pensions as they retire, and presumably live a fairly long time after they retire, and you'll need to have that money available to pay those pensions, and that'll need a lot more tax generated to take care of that, because people live a lot longer now than they used to.
Right. And also, just like other towns, we're looking at our unfunded liability, which is other than post-employment, which is the other post-employment benefit, aside from just pension. So I don't know what's the extent of that now, but I think the community need to know about that at this early, so that nothing is a surprise when that impacts our capability to develop a budget.
The idea of being forward-thinking, I guess, is something that's very important now, because we do a lot of things. We used to do things in a way where we only looked ahead a short while into the future and took care of, political leaders would take care of what was going to happen within their time in office without concern about what would happen afterwards. But now I guess it's we have to look forward into the distant future and plan for these things better, and arrive at ways of paying for things in advance, knowing that they're coming down the pike.
Well, there's no question. This is reality. We have to address all those issues today, and that's why I said we cannot walk away from this by borrowing money. And I think by completing all the projects that we started, already been approved by the residents, then we can look at what else is needed. But to me, borrowing money is should be the last resort. And you got to look at the needs base of this thing. For instance, we have other projects in town that would require far more immediate attention than other projects. An example of that is at the high school roof, for instance. Yes, we spent $31.7 million on that renovation.
Okay. We're going to come back from a public service announcement in just a minute, and we'll talk about that and all the other issues confronting Brookfield in the near future and the distant future. This is Progressive Soup. I'm David Stevenson, and I have Ernie Nepomuceno with me, who's a candidate for First Selectman in Brookfield. Thank you.
The key word there is independence.
Guide dogs are an important part of life for many blind people, and the law permits them everywhere that's open to the public.
The last 50 years, I've had 6 guide dogs, all from the Guide Dog Foundation.
She's my best friend, and it's because she's always there for me 110% of the time.
The Guide Dog Foundation for the Blind has been providing guide dogs to blind people free of charge for more than half a century.
It gives me the confidence to go try things and to go do things that I probably wouldn't ordinarily do.
Now I go where I want and I do what I want.
People have to understand that the dog is working, and when they want to try to pet the dog, it breaks her routine.
A blind person and a guide dog are a team, working for independence.
And so put the two of us together, and we're invincible.
To learn more, call the Guide Dog Foundation for the Blind, 1-800-548-4337.
Welcome back to Progressive Soup. I'm David Stevenson. We have Ernie Nepomuceno with me, who is a candidate for First Selectman in Brookfield on the Best for Brookfield ticket. Ernie, regionalization. We're beginning to hear a lot about regionalization in our area. Tell our audience about it and define it and apply it to the situation.
I think if we can pull our purchasing power, for instance, what I envision is to align with other towns, and we can regionalize our purchases, whether it's for school supplies or town supplies or whatever services. I think most towns do have similar needs and similar requirements. And so if we can do that, that will leverage our purchasing power. The other thing is we can also regionalize bidding for some mandated requirements. Let's talk about revaluation. A number of towns in this area will be required to do a revaluation again.
Yes.
As early as next year. And when you bid that, the cost of revaluation is not cheap. This is a full revaluation, not just a pass-through revaluation.
Yeah, revaluation is an expensive process,
It is an expensive process.
But it equalizes taxes out across the board for property owners, and whether they be residential or commercial properties. But
but the cost of doing that is significant. It could be upwards of $350,000, $400,000. And so if we can regionalize bidding for that so that we can cooperate with other towns, then we can leverage that process.
And drive the price down.
That's correct.
To the savings of the town.
Right.
Good.
The other thing I want to do for the town is to implement an operations improvement program. By that I meant, because I instituted this in my private life, was very successful. This program will involve encouraging town employees. After all, they're right there in the forefront. For instance, the highway department and all the department that are there every day. They can see, or they see what's going on. This program will encourage them to make suggestions how we can eliminate waste, reduce our costs. And they will not get a monetary reward, but we will have a program, we will have an award, and we will recognize them for that effort. And I think, I envision that saving us, or at least eliminating, if there's any waste in the operation of the town. So that I would like to do. The other thing that I intend to do is make the governance of the town as transparent as possible. By that I meant that we're going to be open. There will be no more need for any resident to obtain any information or town document by invoking a freedom of information.
So no wrestle between the town and the wrestling between the town and the people of the town to find out information of what's going on in the town. You mentioned Freedom of Information Act. A lot of times people will have to, the town will force them to go to the state, to go through the process of finding out information that should be open to them automatically.
That's right. Because there's costs associated to that too. There's legal costs associated to that. And so we can save some legal costs if we can make this as transparent as possible. So the other thing that I envision happening is to review our charter again in town. For instance, we had a town meeting the other night, and if I'm right, if I recall, there were fewer than 10 people who attended that and passed the resolution. And so I envision creating another a charter commission again to look at our charter and make appropriate changes to the charter as necessary. And I would envision that to be comprised of people who have not been involved in any other boards or commissions in the past.
So you have that independence.
We will have an independence on that.
People will be on the outside. People that know the inside but can be objective about these things will be looking at the charter and coming up with some good ideas to make things more open. And you mentioned 10 people at a public meeting. That seems to be the case in a lot of the towns, in our area at least. You get very small attendance.
Right.
Now, by altering that, would you possibly be allowing every meeting to be taped, videotaped, and put online so people can watch it and scan through and find the parts of the meeting that are of most interest to them?
We're beginning to do that now, but I intend to make the full use of our website to do that. All minutes, all agendas. I also intend to make a report on a monthly basis to the people of the town as to what's going on, so they don't have to wait to read them in the paper. So they can look at the website. Progress status report will be there. Cost-wise, if it's not costly, we may need to send them periodic newsletter, for instance, to the extent that we can afford it. But if not, we will use the website to do that. And so, again, in terms of transparency, I think that's a first step. So.
Now, I've heard some complaints from some of the voters in Brookfield. Now, I ran for state representative last year and talked with a lot of people door to door and found that a lot of people were concerned about apparently over $500,000. Any item over $500,000 needs to go to a referendum. And some items that were substantially above $500,000 had been broken down into smaller pieces to avoid going to a referendum, to letting the people have a vote on them. Did you remember this happening? Did you see this as being an issue?
I think I don't think that's an issue. I don't think that's happening in town. I think there might be an appearance of that, but the projects are in itself is a separate. And so the only intent of doing that is to save time.
Okay.
But we have to follow our charter. And the charter says that if we're going to borrow more than $1 million, we have to go to a referendum. And sometimes they try to get it below $1 million, so there will be no
that's
referendum.
That's the threshold. Okay.
So that's the threshold for that. And but we need to follow the charter. That's my thing. And as long as we follow the charter, then there should be no worry whatsoever.
What other things would you like to talk about in terms of Brookfield? What's happening in Brookfield and how you would like to improve it?
Well, there's a lot of things that we can improve on in Brookfield. Some of which we discussed today. What I'd like to, for the people to know is, in addition to being practical about this thing, in addition to addressing the issues that we face in the next couple of years, that's short term, my vision is to ensure that Brookfield continues to be a desirable town, that it continues to be a town where people can raise families in a nurturing environment. My vision is also to make sure that Brookfield continues to be as safe as it is, and that's why one of my priorities there is public health and safety. Okay. In that regard, the town we need to make sure that our police department, volunteers, fire department, for instance, they do have ample or adequate equipment, and that the personnel continues to have adequate training in order to be able to do their job. Okay. We also need to make sure that, for instance, our public works department, that they do have the tools they need, equipment otherwise, in order to do what's expected from a highway public works department. So we need to look into that. Otherwise, we will have problems down the road. And so I think it's not about lower tax rate. We're trying to do that. But in the sense of doing that, we also need to look at what else is needed within the confine of what our taxpayers can afford. And so I think we can do that. The problem with Brookfield is it's a small area-wise, and 13,000 acres is not sufficient. And as I said, 76% of that has been fully developed for residential development, and only 5% has been developed for commercial development. And so what we've left out of the 24% is about 500 acres available for commercial development. And so you just don't have enough land to develop more business entities. But my goal is to, as you know, in the immediate future, at least in the next 2 years, is to replace those businesses that we lost. We've lost over 100 businesses in just the past year. And so the priority is to replace those, encourage businesses to open an operation in Brookfield. We have the space, and all you do is drive down Federal Road and you see all the space available. We need to fill them up. And to me, the way to do that is I would envision, like we have an Economic Development Commission, for instance, that they should be refocused on purely on the economy of Brookfield, including its manpower and availability of workforce. And so also I have approached a few highly successful business people willing to work with me and advise me in terms of attracting businesses to come back to the town so that we can fill up or replace those 100 plus businesses that we lost. And so that's ongoing.
Do you think it's possible to have a good portion of the workforce in Brookfield actually be able to afford to live in Brookfield and stay close to their workplaces in terms of commuting, or will we continue to see people traveling further and further distances to get to work in Brookfield?
I think if you keep taxes affordable in Brookfield, then you'll have people staying in town. The other thing is you got also to maintain good schools. And in fact, not too long ago, it was noted that Brookfield was the only exception, the only town whose schools are not behind the No Child Left Behind program.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it at that. We'll get Ernie back in a future date to talk further. I'm David Stevenson. This is Progressive Soup. Good evening.